Weekly update. Actually, you can't see this. If do you have the Twitch stream up or something?
No, but I can. I can. Here we go. Twitch.tv. Oh. Okay. Awesome. Oh, that's amazing. Holy shit. What's that program again?
I
That's
don't know. It's
incredible.
some note taking thing. All right.
iNote Airboard, something like that. That's awesome. Oh my gosh. Oh, and it's happening. Okay, here we go. So, how have you been digging the Unraid box? Have you had a chance to kind of like dig into it and do some stuff?
I have not really touched it, but I do. Like when I was doing a stream with Logic, I couldn't even play the music. Like it would just degrade. I'd have to disable a bunch of plugins. So that's actually like with Unity stuff. Like if I'm streaming, it will compile and load slow. And so that was, because I was doing so much Unity stuff, that's why I was like, oh, it makes sense to have a separate stream box. But I can't even do really audio streaming because at some point it just uses too much CPU and then it just, stops working.
Oh, do you mean out of the Unraid box?
No, on my Mac Pro. So that's why I was like, that's why I'm like, okay, now I have a very a specific thing I cannot do otherwise. Without doing that. So, but that requires an audio, my audio interface, and I'm hoping, and actually we didn't even really investigate it, but I'm hoping that getting a new USB controller will make it work. Because we got that error, but you have the same, the same kind of audio interface, right?
It's similar, but it's not the exact same one. Let me grab it really quick.
I also got an Apple Watch.
Oh shit! What? Dang! Did you get GPS or GPS and cell?
Wait, hold on. I have one of those. My old one.
Yeah. Okay.
And so this one is a different. The one I'm using is a different model, but it should work, right? If that worked for you.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't get the same error that you got though, where we couldn't even start the VM with it. But all my audio problems were alleviated with the USB controller. So I think that's just what we got to end up doing. I've almost found the perfect USB controller for you. So I'm just like vetting the parts before I suggest you buy it. So.
Oh shit! I'm ruining my. I forgot I went to you switched to screen capture instead of window capture for you because of that delay thing. So I was opening windows over your face and stuff. Okay.
What? No.
So yeah, otherwise not really anything new on the Unraid machine. I have a couple of like minor updates and then some bigger things that you can like. That we could dig into.
Sure.
So I'm probably going to be working with 2 interns. So I was already working with one or trying out one, and he's been doing really well. And then I just talked to somebody else Friday, and that also might work out really well. And they're both seem very. They're both like 18, and so, but very like, they already have a lot of experience, kind of self-taught, and so that sort of makes things a little easier. And let's see, I did, again, kind of trying to refactor my finances and stuff to fund this project. I had this idea of, it was kind of a convoluted idea of doing like buying a fourplex and then doing all this other kind of real estate-y things that have to do with building up towards like intentional community building and buying apartment complexes and stuff like that. But really, the main reason why I would be doing that now is for cash flow reasons for this project that ties into both other financing options and stuff. Because we talked about this, right? Like how, like, if I have some properties or whatever, you can usually take out a loan against them for like 70 to 80% of their value, but then that's limited by your debt to income ratio. And since I have no income recently, like it has to go through a whole other thing, and ultimately the amount that they could loan for like a cash flow thing would be it was like less than, it was like a, oh god, what was it? It was like a sixth of what I could because of my current income situation. And I was kind of going through the process of doing that alone for cash flow, and then realized that that wouldn't really help yet. And then also I couldn't refinance that for a year. And then on the other side, there's this idea of investing in real estate, and part of that would be to get the income from the rental properties that would increase my income and the ability to like take out a bigger loan for whatever cash flow stuff. But of course, that kind of income doesn't count towards that for like 1 to 2 years, because you need to have 1 to 2 years of history of income or whatever. So I was talking to basically my finance team. You met those guys, right? Money Positive.
Yep.
I actually highly recommend what they usually do, which is like financial planning for individuals and families for a fixed fee. So if anybody out there has like problems with money or budgeting or whatever, they make it really easy. But they're kind of helping me out in general with my finances to figure out how to do all this stuff. And they kind of convinced me. I was talking to one of them, Sean. He's been using Fundrise, and it was similar to something else that I was looking at, but it's kind of like a crowd. It's not. It's kind of like they do investments. It's one of those things where it's like when I was thinking about the apartment complex, I was like, oh, I could take on partners, right, to invest, and then so that it doesn't use up so much of my capital to then tie it up in that. And so this is kind of the same thing, except anybody can kind of like, they do opportunities, and they know what they're doing. They have all this data, and there's versions of this where you can like use their data and make your own decisions, but most of these are kind of like a managed thing, and you can optimize it for an income stream. And what's kind of better about this, besides the why I decided to do this instead of doing an apartment or like a fourplex here, was because the sorry, all this money stuff, it's not very technical, but it's like trying to figure out how to fund this thing. But Fundrise and similar things, you can basically put in X amount of money, and then it's diversified over several deals. And Austin, for example, is not necessarily the best place right now for rental properties, because the value is higher than the rent. The prices of the places are higher than what you would expect for the income that you would get from them. So actually investing in places other than Austin would be better, but I don't want to like be a landlord to a place that's not. Yeah. So this seems like kind of, it solves a lot of problems for what I specifically want to do right now. And I'll come back around to like the fourplex and apartment complex real estate projects later. But so that's good, because I was stressing about the loan paperwork. They want all this. They're like, oh, let us see all these documents, because I don't have income, so they need to like see all this extra stuff.
take blood samples,
Yeah.
birth certificate. No, totally, totally.
Anyway, money-positive.com. If anybody out there wants it, I recommend it. Another quick thing, the biggest thing is what I did this week with VS Code and how I'm approaching the front end for the Manifold project. But before that, I wanted to mention, because it is kind of related to the Program Empire or whatever, but like a friend of mine, actually, the production assistant that I had working on the indie game Legend 3D, he was like, oh, do you have any work? And I had the idea. I told you about the X-Band story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Or maybe this whole thing, but basically I wanted him to do some research on the X-Band story, basically go look up the sources that were used for that documentary, and then kind of do, like, they didn't touch much on the origin story, but I guess for context too, you might know about this, but oh, and this ties back into the thing, but I want to do film projects, and one that kind of pie in the sky project that I wanted to do was based on the book Masters of Doom, which is the story of id Software and all that pioneering first person game stuff that Carmack did, and it's a really cool, like, the book isn't like the best written book, but the story is very like it's like one of my ideal stories. It's like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's did you read the book?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've read it twice now.
You remember when they were working at that company before, and they like got their own like special room, and they like
Oh, soft disk.
yeah, at Softus, they blocked out all the windows, and it was just pitch black in there, blasting metal. I was like, oh god, that's the dream while
Yeah,
they're making games.
yeah. Like, yeah. A lot of people at the company were upset with them because they had their own fridge.
Yeah,
So that was a big point of contention.
but it was kind of like they were living the dream that I had as a kid.
Mm-hmm,
So it was a really
absolutely.
fun story, and about creation and about technology, and so I had loosely looked into like getting the rights for it without like an agent or anybody that could actually properly do this. But I'm like, okay, who's the copyright owner? Let's see if I can email them, and I never heard back. But then recently, Timothy sent me a link that showed that what's his name? I love him. James Franco and his
Oh,
brother
James Franco.
are
Yeah.
are doing a Netflix show or something like that with it. And so I was like, well, that's maybe they could do a good job. I like his work. I like he thinks about stuff. But then there goes my story. I wanted to do something with that story. And then randomly, I think I was just up late watching my own Program TV channel, and I saw that documentary again. I was like, oh, what if I took this as like a baseline for
Mm-hmm.
an original story, but it's sort of loosely based on the story of X-Band, which is in itself is really cool and sort of like unknown. And so, yeah, so I asked Matthew to do some research. Um, And it's funny though, because I was talking to him, and he went to school for film, and so he has some film buddies, but also game buddies. He worked with a writer friend who is actually really good at doing this kind of research, and his mentor actually turns out to be the showrunner that is going to do the Masters of Doom project.
Oh, shut up. Oh
So,
my God.
so,
Crazy.
so, I think they've already started production on the pilot, but I thought it would be cool if there was some way to get somebody in our network to be involved in that, like me or Ray, like somebody like Ray too, because her aesthetic is just so like computery and perfect. When we're watching what's it called, Halt and Catch Fire, she's like picking apart all the like that Commodore monitor doesn't have the right cables or whatever.
Oh,
um
that's awesome.
but regardless of that, there's this research thing on this X-Band thing. I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm just doing some initial research. So that's cool, because it'd be cool to do some proper film project.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
And oh, by the way, how is the Hacker Dojo I saw they just did Chris Messina's interview. I
Yep.
don't know how involved you are in the communication of that project right now.
Totally, totally. So we actually had our first sort of like all hands meeting for the documentary last Thursday, and then we're gonna have a recurring one every Monday night. Um, so essentially, we like kind of mapped out, took stock of all the footage that we have, kind of created a list to for things to acquire like B-roll and photos and stuff, all the stuff that's going to go in between the narrative. Um, Next up, we have to log all the footage. I'm going to try and speed that process up by doing automatic transcription. And then if I'm really fancy, I could do like,
What are you gonna use for transcription?
summarization. Oh, like you basically like can do use FFmpeg to slice everything your audio into 30-second clips, and then you send it up to any speech recognition service like
Okay,
Google
like
or
Microsoft.
whatever.
Didn't you say
Yeah,
some of
anything.
Microsoft's APIs are like pretty good?
Yeah, some of them are for sure. Um, yeah, so basically, like next Monday, we're going to really nail down the logging situation. After which, I'll probably take the drive and then the NAS that Tom made, and then basically get Mark to start working on it. We're gonna do like a 30-minute doc for this, with the idea to, expand it or whatever. There's visions. Um, and the storyline has been roughly mapped out, at least like the
Ooh,
major beats. Like maybe the emotional beats aren't extracted yet because you actually have to see what people talked about.
yeah.
Um, but Ed did a great job of like highlighting, like taking all the headshot interviews and giving them a color code as to like which era they can talk about. And then some people obviously arc over the whole thing, like you. So they did an awesome job, made it super easy to onboard and to like get us going on this. So I'm really stoked because obviously there's a whole like PR component to making this that's good for the dojo, but also like um it's we have to tell the stories, like this era could be kind of like the nuance and the details could be forgotten if people don't
Mm-hmm.
talk about it.
Yeah.
And I'd hate to think that like someone would say something like Facebook invented the hackathon or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, so I'm really stoked. Everyone's heart's in the right place, and I'm gonna lock Mark in a room and make him do it. It's
So,
great.
for context too, I'm putting up the Hacker Dojo site just so people can see because there's a 10-year anniversary coming up
Hmm.
in October in Santa Clara. It's gonna be a big party or whatever, and it also is kind of in celebration of DevHouse. This is sort of a version of the DevHouse logo, and they decided to do a documentary and about the Hacker Dojo story, and it turns out to be very interesting because of the Super Happy DevHouse story and all of that influential stuff. And I'm really glad that somebody's capturing those stories. And then yeah, so Steve and his husband are working on that. Anyway, that was a cool update. So one of the big things that I did this week that actually pertains to any software development is you remember last week I was kind of going back and forth between, oh, should we do a JavaScript React stack or come up with a new Go stack for front end? And I had previously had this idea of like, well, what if I just did it as an extension to VS Code? And the when I was thinking about it, there were a couple of like pros and cons. One of the reasons why I didn't want to is because in the long term, I thought that because this is going to be an extensible interface, I wanted the technology for it to be something that's familiar for a lot of people. So something like React, and it's interesting because VS Code is very much not React. It's kind of I don't know how to describe it. They use TypeScript, but then they kind of do more like, I want to say, a traditional like just directly manipulating the DOM, with JavaScript classes and stuff like that. It's kind of an older school approach, and it's not necessarily bad, but it's not like what people are kind of familiar with. So in terms of like a long-term platform, I was kind of like, maybe not. But the reasons why it would work is because one part of the front end that I need to make is an editor, and I don't, in one of the versions of the prototype, I could kind of make a shitty editor, but to make an editor that you want to use is pretty difficult. So, and it also has like the main components of the manifold or tractor UI is like a tree view. Besides like tabs of anything like an editor or custom interface, like the main things of the system that you need is a tree view for kind of a hierarchy, and then an inspector. And they don't have an inspector, but they have basically the way VS Code works is for things that they don't let you extend directly, that's part of their sort of user interface, like status bar items or the tree view or the activities on the left. You can basically create a tab that is just sort of like it's a web view, so you can kind of do HTML5 or whatever, and it's sandboxed in the system and runs in a separate tab. And so I can do the inspector in that, and then I'd still have to use some web technology, and the architecture for the information flow is very different. But what this will get me is like, there are a lot of decisions I don't have to make. I don't have to decide which way to approach the front end stack, because this is basically like a placeholder for if nothing else, a prototype to continue to like explore the idea. And then the benefits of having the rest of VS Code there. And another concern that I had was I didn't want people to look and think that this was a VS Code specific thing. Like, oh, it's just a VS Code plugin. But because it's so early, that's probably not relevant, like what people think of this. And but one of the interesting ideas, though, because VS Code, it runs in Electron, but also people have gotten VS Code to work in the browser. And I don't know exactly how they've done it. I looked at their code, but I don't know VS Code enough to really understand it yet. But one idea is I could create a very lightweight alternative to Electron in Go, and then use the one that was ported to the web and run it in there. So I can create my own sort of fork of VS Code that is just, so that's one outcome is, once things are like, oh, this works out pretty good doing things the VS Code way and stuff, we could actually take that and fork it and just make that, because VS Code is almost all interfaces, professional tool interfaces are sort of they're so general. If you think about it, it's like, oh, they all have an inspector, they all have like some kind of nav tool, often a hierarchy of some kind, whether it's for file system or like project structure or whatever. So I actually kind of like the idea of using VS Code as like a shell for this, and then I don't have to worry about the aesthetics either, right? Because it's like, just whatever VS Code does and whatever theme it has, and so it sort of eliminates some things to worry about for now. And then we can always come back around to them later.
Sure. It's a cool idea.
So this week I mostly was just validating that it will do all the things that I need it to do, and then doing like a dumb version of each to make sure they all work and have an idea of what the constraints and limitations are and how I have to architect some of the stuff. But yeah, I think it'll work. So this next week I'll probably be working more on that, basically porting the React prototype, which is the one that's furthest along, to VS Code, and it'll reuse the same backend and everything and stuff. So
Killer. That's awesome.
And that's everything I have to say about this week.
Woo! Oh shit.
There's only
Nice.
25 minutes. We didn't say let's do 40 minutes and then talk for an hour.
Wait, no, I'm not done. Okay. I need what I want to talk about is at least 30 minutes. No, but there's one thing that's kind of interesting that's related, but a different sort of path off this. So what I wanted to talk to you about is, in Notion, I pulled up that design spec because it's like, okay, template, design spec. Okay, I think that's what I need, right? So I click on it, and I remember immediately like reading through the questions and thinking like, feeling deeply conflicted about the verbiage that was being used. Like proposed work, like dependencies, risks. It's just like, oh my God, like, but I thought, okay, well, this is kind of interesting. I don't have enough experience in this space of like, managifying things to know if it's good or bad. Maybe I just don't understand. So I kind of tried to bend my head to it a little bit, but not too much, right? And so I don't know if you read any of the stuff that I had put in, specifically the manifold one, but I was having this weird experience where I was trying to include not just the concrete reasons for things, dependencies, whatever, but I also was like including like philosophical reasons, like especially when it comes to something like the risk.
Yeah.
So I started thinking, okay, well, this system in retrospect, it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, why doesn't it work? In my opinion, I feel like that design doc, the design spec as it was, that template, is a great tool for managing execution of something, right? It's the how of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that leaves to kind of like use the idea of like, like components. I kind of feel like I started to model ideas as ideas, like ideation, the why, which is the subjective human component, and then the how, right? And the how would be something like that design spec in Notion. And so I started to think like, okay, the what would be like some idea, like we want to make a tool for making tools. Well, why?
Yep.
Why do you want to do that? And it's the question. It's like what you said in one time that really kind of resonated with me. It's like, well, why the computer? There's no direct, like, it's not so black and white. And when using something like the design spec doc, you can't come to the conclusion of something like a computer with that. It just changes the language you use and changes the way that you think about the problem. But it's an effective tool and that kind of verbiage for a certain part of the problem, like when you want to execute on the problem. So that's kind of where I'm at. Some next things that I want to look into are, I want to start actually researching this problem space of like what people do about like managing ideation, like connecting it all, because this model may already be in use.
Well, I guess I was kind of under the impression, because what this felt like was it was more of a project management type of thing, but there is this element that you're trying to get at, which is more of the like, I don't know, how do you organize the meta, the project of projects, right?
Well, I think also I wanted to in some way capture what it is that what is the reason that we do something,
Right.
And it can be subjective, and it doesn't need to be like something that lines up perfectly.
Yeah, it's kind of like a background or context statement. Part of
Sure.
part of the problem statement. Yeah, I think very often the why is not documented. Intention, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but the problem is that's like, for me, when I start writing about that stuff, it's like, all right, I'm gonna explain everything. So it's a little dangerous to be like, for me to have like a one of my projects to have like a background context section, because it's like, oh shit.
Yeah.
But you
So
know,
for example, like in that Notion doc, like I started doing something like that, like more philosophical reasoning, and I'm like, okay, this just cannot work. This is firstly like not the place for it, but it's like also like, is that useful to anyone else
yeah, yeah,
besides
yeah.
me?
Well,
So-
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think maybe those are two different things, right? Those are kind of two different.
Mhm.
You know, it's almost like oftentimes in like management and leadership stuff, that's usually the distinction between management and leadership. Management is often focused on the how, and leadership is
Mhm.
focused on the why. Um, and so I think it's important to talk about the why and the intent and the bigger picture, but it's sort of separate from the problem of executing.
Mhm.
So um, I guess the question is, where do we put what, you know?
Mhm. And that'll be next week. So I started digging into what I'm going to do next week is I'm going to do research on all of this stuff, kind of understand the space better, because there may already be like really deep insights that I'm completely unaware of. But then also,
There's a lot of like
like,
productivity models, you know, SWOT, and you know, these like various like acronyms and ways to phrase, to set up. I mean, in project management, there's a ton of stuff that's like a whole
mhm,
field domain of expertise. There's some really cool models in there, and I've seen a lot of them. And in theory, I should go back and revisit and see what would be useful. Um, I mean, even like when I was starting to do the project pages, let's see, what was it? Um, let's see, Patreon, right? So it's like I did a Patreon page, and I don't know, that was kind of an interesting attempt at creating like a project page. There's sort of an executive summary that sort of defines a goal. And there's a lot of
mhm,
stuff I remember from writing business plans, and that's another sort of like good. Like if you look up how to write business plans, there's some really great stuff, especially for the executive summary, because the executive summary is usually a summary, is basically a one pager. You know, it's that a one pager of the document, and what they put in there. And actually, probably the idea of a one pager for anything is probably worth looking up. You know, because I know the idea of a one
absolutely.
pager is used in a lot of different contexts.
Yeah, I kind of find what the general components of like all one pagers are,
Mm-hmm.
like what people, because I'm sure it is the same sort of thing for sure.
Yeah.
Um, there is one other part of this I was going to mention, but it flew out the window. If it comes back, I'll let you know.
Shit.
Just
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about like how much like I could easily, like that's almost what, like as a kid I was obsessed with project management, because that was sort of like how you get things done, and I've mostly sort of like internalized it, so it's sort of like you learn all the rules and then you kind of like wing it, you know. But even though
sure,
like it's
sure,
probably good to go back and like actually formally follow some certain thing, you know, whatever, revisit the material to see like, oh, we should do this. And but yeah, that's just another context for me. And so I need to figure out like, oh, if I spend time on that, where and when do I spend time on that? But
Yeah.
I don't know,
Because organizing all this stuff is,
maybe we should have project management sessions or something where we hang out
oh, that might not be a bad idea.
and just
Yeah.
kind of like pair program on the Notion or something.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Because that I quickly realized on the plane is a humongous problem. Like
Mm-hmm.
organizing the work, understanding the importance of each thing, making it clear to other people. It's a huge, huge task. So that'd be a good idea.
All right, maybe we'll do something like that this week.
Cool.
I guess that's all I got. Do you want to go deeper in anything? We're at 35 minutes, so we might
Perfect.
hit our mark.
Woo!
I got nothing else fun to say.
Yeah, I'm just doing nothing after this. Just gonna turn it off, just stare into the corner.
I'm gonna do chores. That's
Nice.
kind of one of the things that I'm just trying to get chores and like, a backlog of things that house things and finish setting up this office. Like, uh, it is an ongoing thing, I guess, but I'm trying to like get as much done as possible so that I can like ignore it for
Hmm.
however long so that we can sort of like do some sort of like long sprint that comes back to my like pre-production model. Like nothing's in production right now, we're in pre-production, so it's sort of like nothing, progress is made but no there are no like goal, deadlines yet because we don't
Hmm.
have the plan. So part of pre-production is coming up with the plan, and then once we have the plan then we can execute. And so when we get into that, like it would be really nice to then not worry about like other stuff. So a lot of this time I'm trying to set up for doing that, so that when we finish I'm not like overwhelmed by like all the things that went to hell.
Yeah.
There's so much
Yes, love it.
administration stuff when you're not just being independent, but then if you're doing anything like this, it's crazy. I don't know how
Uh,
anybody gets anything done.
well, on that note, on that upper of a note, this cool. Awesome. So yeah, like if you have time and it bubbles up and you're feeling inspired to do the project management thing this week, cool. If not, we can totally like continue to iterate and pick it up in the following week. Um, but yeah, other than that, awesome.
Boom, we did it. Weekly update. Nobody chatted. Well, a couple people said stuff, but I wasn't paying attention, so oh well.
Neither was I. Shit.
I think though this is a pretty good time for weekly updates, so we'll say Saturday mornings for now, and roughly 11:30. So this time,
Cool.
what is that your
Perfecto.
time?
9:30.
Okay. Turn on your San Francisco background.
I was waiting. I was waiting for you to say that. Do, 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 do. Oh, so hot.
See,
Oh my
now
gosh, look at me.
now we know where you are. I could do one that has like
Yes.
Texas or something. Just desert.
Yeah.
All right. I guess that's it. Goodbye, everybody.
Later.